All right, folks, this is Wayne Van Sluis, and I will not be on video much because I'm on a real low bandwidth, but I just wanted to say hi, and welcome to the spatial portion, or the spatial hands-on lab for today's TechCast days. David will be sharing his screen shortly, and we will get going.
The share working, Wayne?
I see your screen. And it is 11:40 a.m. Central Time, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. We have people coming in and going from the previous session. Welcome to TechCast Days, and I would like to have you join our community. We have a various areas in which to do that. We have the Slack channel, and.slack.com. We have our paperly newsletter, which is a daily feed of topics related to big data, analytics, and the like. You can also join us out on LinkedIn. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Next slide, please. And for those of you interested in more of the spatial side, we do have our Twitter handle, the Spatial Sig, Aura at Spatial Sig. We have our mailing list. So if you're interested in getting emails from us on topics related to spatial, any of our TechCasts, you can send us an email. We'll add you. Again, the LinkedIn group, we have a special group there. And those are in the chat, so you'd be able to get to those. Next slide, please. And with that, I'd like to introduce myself. You see me on the lower right. My name is Wayne Van Sluis. I'm a lead consultant in the analytics practice of Argano Interrel. And then I am joined by David Lapp from Oracle. David is with product management in the spatial area. And there's a little bit of our bio. I live in St. Louis, and David lives just outside of Boston. For those of you new to Zoom webinars, we have the normal chat, and we'd like that to be reserved for us sending you information. So we will be posting links throughout the session and other information as well throughout the session in the chat. If you have a question, we would prefer that you post that question through the Q&A. And the Q&A is a button on the bottom of your screen, and you can post your question there either anonymously, or you can keep your name associated with it, and we will either answer in line on the Q&A, or we will answer verbally. So just to please, again, questions put in QA, we will be posting information in the chat. All right, next slide, please. And David, please take it away.
Okay, thanks a lot, Wayne. Wayne, is my audio okay? You hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, thanks. So thanks everyone for joining. And what we're going to do in this workshop today is just give you a sort of an overview and a flavor for working with Spatial Studio, which is our tool for spatial analysis and creating interactive maps, basically using the spatial features of the database without having to do coding. And we're going to do that using a scenario involving traffic accident data and police station and police service areas. You're going to end up loading the data, visualizing it, analyzing it, and hopefully getting a sort of a comfort level with Spatial Studio. So the agenda of what we're going to work through is as follows. We're going to begin by having everyone kick off the provisioning of your Live Labs workshop environment. That's going to take 20 minutes or so. And while that's happening, I'm going to provide sort of an overview while that's sort of cooking in the oven, getting ready for you. By the time I finish that overview, you should be ready to access your working environment. And then once we've done that, we're going to move on to the workshop itself. Now, I want to make a quick comment that when you see the workshop, when you sort of see the workshop steps and flow within Live Labs, you're going to see that that there are a couple of introductory steps before the actual labs start. And those introductory steps, introduction and getting started, that's actually the stuff that we're going to be covering together in those first 3 steps. So I just don't want, and no one should sort of jump ahead into those introduction sections and start going through the installation and configurations steps that are there, because again, we're going to go through that together. Okay, so with that said, we're going to jump right into getting that provisioning started so that that can get through that as quickly as possible, and then be able to start the workshop. So Wayne, if you wouldn't mind putting into the chat the link for everyone to access the workshop page. Now, hopefully folks have created your free Oracle account. I think that's one of the things that was mentioned in the invitation email. And so if you've done that, the link is now in the chat, and you can also just type it in using what I have above, tinyurl/Spatial Studio Lab, and you will land in a page that looks like what I'm showing you right now. Once you've arrived at that page, you're going to, as step 2 shows with the arrow, sign in using your Oracle account. And then once you've done that, you will click on that big green button at the bottom that says Reserve Workshop on Live Labs. So I am going to do exactly that at the same time, just to show you what that looks like. So dragging my browser across. Wayne, can you please confirm that you can see my browser showing the workshop page?
Yes, we see it.
Cool. So you're in the workshop page. I've already logged in, as you see here, and you're going to click on Reserve Workshop on Live Labs, and you're going to get a page that looks like this, although you're not going to have this pasted in yet. That's what we're going to get to in a moment. Okay, so once you've clicked that green button, you're going to do the following. Select your own local time zone, and that's just so that the notification emails you get about start and stop times are going to be to your local time zone. The option to start workshop now should already be automatically selected, but if not for any reason, you do want to select that. And then step 3, this one seems a little ugly, and apologize, but it's sort of a necessary step because of the way this environment is put together. There is a key, a long sort of encrypted looking mess there that you're going to copy and paste in, and Wayne has put that whole long string into the chat in Zoom. And so what you need to do is copy that entire long string from beginning to end, copy it and paste it into that window without adding any line feeds, new lines, anything. It should just be basically one long string that wraps and wraps and wraps and wraps. I won't bother explaining the reason that we're having to do this right now, but having you copy and paste this instead of creating your own is fine for this workshop, because this is just a temporary environment that's going to be that'll be terminated at the end of the workshop. So again, copy and paste. I believe Wayne has also put a link. If you have any trouble being able to copy and paste out of there, there's a link that Wayne added to the chat underneath that, which is a link to be able to download a little file with that in it that you could, again, copy and paste right into this window. So making sure that that's one long string, no line feed at the end or anything. It just starts with the character you see at the beginning and ends where it says workshop, no line feed. You're going to check the box to consent, and that consent is only so that we can send you emails that tell you when your environment has been initiated and is ready, and then submit reservation. When you submit your reservation, which you hopefully all have or are about to, you will see you'll be taken to a page where you can view your reservations by clicking that green button, and there's also a sort of a tab across the top that says My Reservations, takes you to the same place. So you can click that, and it's going to give you a message just showing you that you do have a reservation that's been initiated. That'll say pending creation, and then that's going to actually change as soon as the creation begins. That same page is going to turn into a status that shows you there's now 10 minutes left to complete, sort of thing. And so you can just, you'll continue to see that update. And once you've done that and you've seen your reservation, you will receive an email that confirms that you've submitted your request. And shortly afterwards, you'll receive another email that says that your environment is being prepared. So 2 emails, one to say we got your request for environment, and a second email saying we are now preparing your environment. So, so that's going to take around 20 minutes or so. And so we're going to use that time to give you a sort of an overview of what we're going to be doing. But I want to mention now that that we would like everyone to use the Zoom feature to raise your hand once your environment has been created. And once it's been created, you're actually going to get another email notification like the one you see on the right that says your reservation has been created, and then in the email it says your environment's ready. When you get that email, if you could raise your hand, because we eventually want to see, before we move on, sort of, you know, most everyone's hands raised. If you are having trouble, or I did something too fast just now, or you need some help, ask that question in the Q&A, and we'll assist you in getting that addressed. So hopefully that now brings people to the point where you have a reservation that's sort of in the works and being created. And with that, I'm going to take the time while that's being created or your questions are being answered to provide a quick overview of Studio. So for the next, and take probably 15 minutes or so, and hopefully people will start to raise their hands as their environments are being created. Okay. So again, I just want to mention, if people are somehow like already lost or confused or wasn't able to follow along completely, again, use the Q&A and you'll get help that way. And then my colleagues on the panel that are seeing that, feel free to chime in if I need to roll back and explain anything again. Okay, so while that's happening, let's take a quick look at what we're going to be working with. What is this whole Spatial Studio environment? Well, the context here being spatial, just to sort of level set about that, what do we even mean before we get into any of the technology? What do we mean by spatial data or spatial information? Well, any information that references location, and that's a huge, broad, pretty wide and deep category. So any data that you have that references location, like GPS points that just simply tell you where something or someone was at a given time, address information, which obviously references a location. There are data providers, companies that provide all kinds of mapping data to be able to use for all kinds of business purposes, sensor data, Internet of Things that's tracking movement of things. All of that kind of information can be represented as points, lines, polygons, collections and combinations of those kinds of geometries. And that's the sort of stuff that we're going to be working with. Spatial data also includes things like geospatial imagery and 3D geospatial data, so-called point clouds that can represent sort of the world in 3 dimensions, and look at things like the effects of deforestation by looking at the at satellite imagery over time of given areas. Spatial data also includes things like connected networks that let you figure out how to route through and traverse a network, whether it's a road network or an electrical network, etc. These are all forms of spatial data. And one of the common, really powerful characteristics of spatial data is the fact that when you have a bunch of disparate information or data that doesn't have any type of attribute key, if you will, sort of a column to use to join data, location itself can be used to join data. So you can associate and relate information based on things like their spatial relationship, what area are locations within, what are a bunch of locations nearest to, things like that. So very, very powerful to answer these kinds of business questions. You know, what kind of work are we allowed to do here based on the zoning? Where can we reach from a location within a certain amount of time? Am I building in a flood zone? All kinds of questions are answered based on sort of location relationships. So that's what the spatial data is, and the environment that we're going to be working in today is the Oracle database, specifically the Oracle Autonomous Database, its spatial features, and Spatial Studio, which I'll sort of put in context right now. So we talked a moment ago about the different types of spatial data. And in Oracle Autonomous Database, we have points, lines, polygons stored in the database in a native spatial type, as well as geospatial imagery. We're not going to cover that in the workshop, but all those types of spatial data are stored natively in the database. And then within the database, when they're stored natively, there's a whole library full of SQL operators and functions that let you ask spatial questions, just like SQL operators and functions let you ask other kinds of questions like you're used to asking with non-spatial data. Well, SQL in Oracle Database, in Oracle Autonomous Database, includes a vast library of spatial operations just natively within the database. If we want to search among all the items that we have, which are the ones that are closest to something or within an area? What's the perimeter or distance between things? Lots and lots of different spatial questions can be answered in the database. How do you ask those questions? Well, if you look on the right, the traditional way has been through using those sort of coding APIs directly. So you'd use, if you're a database developer or a web developer, or anyone that's leveraging those features, you would use SQL or PL SQL to write routines in the database, or you'd use the Java APIs or use Python to access those same sort of database features. And you'd basically do coding and use those capabilities, which is great, it's powerful, and it will continue to be really important. However, that leaves out the ability to access those features by people who are not going to do coding to ask some straightforward questions. And that can be non-technical types of users that want to be able to access these sorts of features. It can also be technical users, developers, but people that just want to do something that can be done in sort of a quick self-service mode without having to write a bunch of custom code. That's what Spatial Studio is here for. It's to provide self-service access to these spatial features without the need to write code. So to take a quick look at both of those sort of traditional and self-service options, this is kind of what the traditional approach would look like as an example. So if I just wanted to find out, in this case, I have a bunch of branch locations of maybe stores, and then I've got warehouse locations. And I want to ask the question, what are all of the warehouses that are within 50, or what are all the branch locations that are within 50 kilometers of a given warehouse, the Houston warehouse? So who's near the Houston warehouse? And I can ask that question, and then I can see the branches and the branch types that are within distance. And you can see circled in red is the native SQL function or operator that answers the question, you know, who's within distance, which items are within distance. Now, that's how you ask the spatial question. And then if you wanted to see this sort of a thing on the map and create an interactive map that styles this result, then of course that's some additional web coding. And all those capabilities exist within our stack, our location features at Oracle. So you could do all that, but what if you just wanted to ask that same kind of question, but just sort of using drag and drop and without coding? So that's, again, Spatial Studio. And so, you know, the purpose of Spatial Studio, again, is to provide not a sort of any specific custom tailored tool for a particular industry or use case. It's a general purpose tool to access the broad range of spatial operations without having to code or really even understand how all this stuff works in the back end. So I just want to give, and this is what we're going to be working with. This is the subject of the workshop today. So I want to start with a very quick tour of what you're going to be working with in Spatial Studio so that you already have the lay of the land when your environment gets spun up, and you'll kind of have a little bit of a feel for what you're working with. So what you see on the right is the Spatial Studio user interface that you'll have running shortly. And that interface is made up of a bunch of pages that you access with the controls on the left, the navigation panel. So you see projects, data sets, et cetera, et cetera. That's opened and closed with the main hamburger menu, we call it, on the upper left, which is the sort of the common user experience. And those are the pages. Now, those pages provide the following. Projects, the top one, projects are the working environment for all the visualization and analysis that you do in Spatial Studio. Projects are where you visualize your data, look at it in a table, look at it in maps, and ask spatial questions, run analyses. It's your canvas. Data sets are, it's essentially the list of data that you have connected to work with within Spatial Studio. And a data set is simply a pointer to or a reference to data in the database. You're not making copies of data for Spatial Studio. A Spatial Studio data set is not a copy, another local copy of the data. A data set, again, is just, it's a pointer to data that is in the database. Connections are the database connections that you're accessing data from. And then administrative users to Spatial Studio have access to the bottom two tabs, and that you will, because in your environment you're going to have administrator access. We're not really going to do anything with them, but they're not there unless you're an administrator. So long-running jobs can be monitored, and administrative functions like looking at service logs and managing cache and typical admin stuff is done in the administrative tab. So that's the sort of the set of pages that make up the Studio application. And then here's sort of a nominal flow that we're going to end up looking at. So in order to work with any data, like a prerequisite is to have a connection to where that data lives. And those connections are to traditional Oracle databases or Oracle Autonomous databases. Traditional Oracle database on-prem or in the cloud, and of course, Autonomous database in the cloud. So you create connections to data, and you can see that navigation panel on the left side black panel, I've collapsed it now so that you only see the icons and not the full name of each page, but I've selected the connections page, and I'm here saying Autonomous database. On the datasets page, if you are going to create a data set, you have a couple of options. You can either pick from amongst the connections that you have and create a data set from data that's in one of those connections. So you'd pick a connection that's just a connection to a user in the database, and you'd browse through and pick the table or view that you want to create a data set from. That's like existing data in the database. You can also upload data to the database and create a data set from it. So it sort of does two steps in one. If you have a spreadsheet or one of the common spatial formats that you've acquired, you've downloaded from a say, for example, a county website that has land property information in a spatial format, or a customer address list as a spreadsheet, using this upload, it first will upload the data to the database and then create a Spatial Studio data set from it. In other words, pointing to that data. So those are the two common ways to create a data set. There's additional sort of more advanced types of data sets that we won't cover right now. Once you've created data sets, and this is all stuff that you're going to be, you will create data sets in the workshop. One of the other things that you can do with it is some preparation. Now, one of the preparation means that you've loaded, for example, a spreadsheet, or in our new version, a CSV file that has coordinates in it, but does not, that has coordinates or maybe addresses, but it's not already spatial. There's no geometry column in that data yet. Remember, in Oracle database, we store spatial data in a native spatial type, and that's what lets us do all this spatial work. Well, if you load from a spreadsheet, it might have latitude, longitude, or it might have addresses. And this preparation feature in Spatial Studio will let you essentially generate the geometries and prepare the data for spatial work from those raw addresses or coordinates. So we will so-called geocode addresses, derive a location from an address, or prepare from coordinates. Once you've done that, you've connected to data, whether it already had geometries or whether you prepared the data to create geometries. You then have a data set that you can work with in a project. So here we're looking at a project, project user interface. In a project, you add data sets and then you work with them. You work with them by, once a data set is added to a project, you can drag and drop it onto a map. You can actually have multiple maps and tables, and you can drag and drop those data sets into those maps and tables. And once you do that, you can style the way they look. You can ask spatial questions, do all kinds of interesting things with that data. When it comes to asking spatial questions of the data, like which locations are within a region, or which areas are closest to some point of interest, there's a dedicated sort of menu that you'll be working with in this workshop that has all those spatial operations that have a little infographic and description, and you pick from them, and then you basically fill out the form and you run the analysis. And these are just wrappers around or interfaces to the underlying spatial operations in the database. And then once you ask questions, like here I'm saying which locations are in some region of interest, perhaps you can drag and drop those results just like any other data into the map, and you can style it, view it, and away you go. Work that you do in a project can be saved so that you can revisit it. When you save a project, you're going to see it displayed on that projects page, and with a little thumbnail of the project. In addition to saving a project, you can also publish a project, which means create a sort of a read-only simplified view of that project. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles of a full project, but it's something that you can share basically as a web page with other people to be able to open up and look at your work. And those published projects that you share, given some sort of specific configuration that allows public visibility of the data in that project, you can actually publish the project as a standalone web page for people to work with, interactive maps and tables and so forth. But you can also embed it into another application. It becomes sort of a way for you to create a nice interactive map with drag and drop self-service that could be stuck inside of or embedded into another broader application. So one other important feature I mentioned was the fact that not only non-technical users can enjoy the simplicity of Spatial Studio, but also developers that want to, for example, do some kind of spatial work and generate an analysis that gives me maybe the results of all the locations that are near a point of interest. And I need that for some notifications I'm doing or for some other business purpose. I can use Spatial Studio to easily create that analysis, and it automatically creates a GeoJSON endpoint that you can see kind of on the just above that big SQL block on the right. So the work you do in Studio, the analysis you do, automatically are presented and exposed as a GeoJSON endpoint that you can then programmatically integrate in a variety of ways. And in the very bottom there, you see that Spatial Studio also displays the underlying SQL behind the analyses that you create. So it gives you also a way to do some query, like, what are all the locations, like, inside or within 10 miles of some hazard zone do it with drag and drop, look at it in the map, but also see what the SQL was. If you wanted to take that as a start point and do something more sophisticated with it, or sort of pull it out and put it into another application that just wants to use SQL. So that's a sort of a quick overview of first what spatial data is, what spatial is in the database, and the kinds of stuff that Spatial Studio lets you do. Some information, we'll have these links again at the end of the whole workshop, so this will be revisited, but just so that folks are aware, sort of what is this Spatial Studio, how is it made available? Unlike Graph, the Graph Cloud service and Graph Studio, Spatial Studio is not a one of the Oracle Cloud managed services. Spatial Studio is an application that is made available to any Oracle database customer, whether you use Oracle database in the cloud or on premises. If you are a Oracle database customer via a cloud plan or a license, you have access at no additional cost to Spatial Studio, as well as a bunch of other apps. There's a bunch of other deployable applications that do useful things like geocoding and serving serving features, sort of like a map server for custom applications, and a bunch of apps, and Studio is among those apps. So you have access to it at no extra cost. It runs in it's a Java EE application, so it runs in a Java EE server, from the technical perspective. It is on the Oracle Cloud Marketplace, so it can be deployed, from the Cloud Marketplace. We actually, we're using Live Labs to automatically create environments for everyone, but there's also a Live Labs workshop that describes how to do that marketplace deployment if you wanted to do it on your own, to have an environment that's just up and running continually and not just this short-term workshop. So you can do this in the cloud, and you can also download and deploy it to your own WebLogic server, or there's a self-contained version that's just a lightweight pre-deployed bundle that you basically download, unzip, and run, and it gives you sort of a test environment just locally on your laptop. So we'll revisit some of these links later, but that just gives you an overview of kind of how it is that you gain access to Spatial Studio. So let me now maybe take a breath and ask how we're doing.
David, just an add-on to your.
Yeah.
The lightweight one still does require a database, so you still need to have a database for the lightweight self-contained studio to run from your desktop. Yep.
Excellent point. Yep. So a database is a prerequisite for sure. So thanks, Wayne. It's no matter where you're running Studio, and as you're going to see, Spatial Studio needs a database both to store its own metadata, sort of store the information about your project and your analyses, and then of course to access the data you're going to work with. So Wayne, is there any indication of how we're doing with deployment?
I am only seeing 2 hands up right now.
Okay.
3 hands up.
3. Okay. So I'm going to
3 out of 56.
That, okay, that's a pretty low percentage right now.
4.
Yeah. So let's see. Well, I guess we can wait a moment or two. I just hate to plow ahead and then leave folks.
It's like they're starting to trickle in. We're up to 5, so we're at.
So actually, you know what I'm going to do is take another minute or two. Let's see how we're doing on time. So I'll take just like 1 or 2 more minutes, and.
So we have a question that you might be able to answer. It's how is Spatial Studio different from Oracle Maps Builder and Map Viz?
Yep.
And it looks like Lee Quinn is also. Lee Chin is answering as well, but if you could say it out loud, it'd be great.
Yeah, I'll just, then it's a great question. And the answer is that the Oracle Map Visualization component, which folks may have recognized in the past, it was called Oracle Map Viewer. That is a developer toolkit. That is a toolkit that you use to define basically like custom web mapping applications in terms of the way that you organize your data into themes that you're going to put on the map and create the front end, sort of custom web front end. And Map Builder is the client tool to create the metadata for that map visualization component. So really, fundamentally, the answer to the question is that whole bunch of stuff that was asked about, Map Viz or Map Viewer and Map Builder, that's all about a custom development toolkit, whereas Spatial Studio is just a kind of a shrink-wrapped install it and run it, kind of a one-size-fits-all sort of a self-service tool, as opposed to like a whole custom development environment. So we have like 8 people now. So let me take a moment then to open up, open something up that I can sort of take a moment while people are still getting set up. So I'm going to open a Spatial Studio, a totally unrelated Spatial Studio instance that I have here, just to reiterate what you're going to see when we do all get the environments going and get into the tool, so that it's hopefully pretty clear. So when everyone does get Spatial Studio up and running, and we're going to go through this together. But this is like a little preview. You're going to end up seeing a screen like this when Spatial Studio, when you've gone through the steps we're going to do together to get everything up and running. You're going to see this. Now, up in the upper left-hand corner is this hamburger that completely opens and closes.
So David, just so it looks like a lot of people are getting too many people are using the resources message. So some people might be actually stuck. So.
Okay. Well, that's, we're not going to be able to do anything about that. So I guess for folks that can't do this now.
Oh, sorry, if people, I just got it up to 75 people. So it should work. If it still doesn't work, let us know.
Okay. Yeah, we'll give it a.
Yeah, we're at 9 couple people more now.
Yeah, that is you refresh the page and you'll probably see the green button now.
We got 10, so I think we're at 20%. We should be thinking about moving forward.
Yeah. Okay. Because we're definitely going to be rapidly running out of time. Okay. So this is all stuff. I'll just mention that, for whoever isn't able to get this up and going now, the whole flow that we're going to do with the, this environment, you could do this again. You can do this at your leisure again if you don't get it all done now. All right. So we're just going to move ahead at this point. So once you have your confirmation, you go back to your Live Labs webpage, and hopefully you still have that webpage open. If not, if you'd closed your browser or something, there's actually another shortcut, bit.ly /go live labs is just another shortcut that takes you right to the Live Labs page. And if you click on My Reservations, you're going to land where I'm showing you right now. And if your environment's ready, then it was going to say Launch Workshop. Okay, so hopefully for all I see the people that had raised their hands, you should now be able to see this. So you can then go to Launch Workshop, click the Launch Workshop, and it will take you to this page. So let me actually bring mine across here and show you. So we're looking at the same thing. So here's my Live Labs page. I clicked on My Reservations, and then I'm going to click on Launch Workshop. If it sort of automatically scrolls down, you can scroll up, because what you're presented with now is all of your information, like your own, your own personal information about your workshop environment, and then the workshop itself is all down below. And like I said at the beginning, don't jump down into the workshop and start going through introduction and other stuff, because we're really doing it together up here with what I'm going to walk through. So what's in here that you need to note are the following, and you're going to really keep this page open so that you can always refer back to these items as we do next steps. So what these items are: this username is literally your own Oracle Cloud username that you're going to be logging in with, and then an initial password that you're going to be prompted to reset. Down here is your compartment. It has the same prefix of your username - compartment. Compartments you could think of as almost like folders in the Oracle Cloud where your artifacts are stored. And then next to instances is a set of numbers with dots in the middle, and that's the address, the web address for your quote unquote instance, which is really the instance of your Spatial Studio application. So we're going to end up using that later. So all this is retrievable by going back to this page anytime to your reservations and seeing all this stuff. But that's what these things are, and they're important. We're gonna use them in a moment. All right. So first thing that when you oh, I'm sorry. And then finally, you're gonna launch console, which is the button up on the right. And when you launch console, you're going to be taken to a page, a sign-in page, and you're going to be using the sign-in that's at the bottom, the direct sign-in, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Direct Sign-in. So you click that little button to expand the bottom, and it should automatically have your username in there. And if it doesn't, you remember what your username is, you put it there, but it should be there. And then that temporary password. So you're going to put those in and then sign in. And so I'm actually going to do that much myself right now. So I'm going to first copy this password, this temporary password. I'm going to say launch console, and I'm going to paste in that password. And that's wrong. Okay, so I'm first going to copy the user. B59. No, that was right. And then I'm going to copy the password. Sign in. It's not liking that. 5259 user. 5259 user. Why won't this work? Oh, there we go. Okay, so it's going to prompt me to change the password, and just to be lazy right now, I'm going to just use that initial password again. It's because I can always go back and get it. I won't, you know, I wouldn't memorize it, but I can always go back and get it because it's on this page. So you could change it to anything you want, but I'm just going to reuse that default. So then I'll save that new password, and it's going to take me to into the cloud, into my cloud account. So once you change that password, now if it takes you into the cloud, the main hamburger menu here, if you click on it in the upper left, will take you to where you can navigate to different cloud resources. And what we want to navigate to, and the first step that we need to do right now as we get this prepared, is that our Spatial Studio application is going to need to connect to the Oracle Autonomous Database that was created for you. And in order to make that connection, there is a file that we need to download called a Cloud Wallet. It just has the information about the database you're going to connect to. So when you click on that hamburger menu to open up this panel, at home, there will be Autonomous Database as the very first item. So you just click on Autonomous Database, and initially nothing's going to show because everything is organized in these folders, folder-like things, which I described earlier, which is a compartment. And everyone doing the lab right now has their own compartment. So we need to get into our compartment to find our database. So to do that, we know what our compartment is, and we know what our username is. I can actually just start typing the username, and it's going to just filter the compartments as I do that. So if I paste that in, you see it automatically just filtered all the compartments to the one that is mine. So I'm going to click on that compartment, and there's my Oracle Autonomous Database. Now that I have that database, and I will show it in the slides here. Now that I have that database, I started typing my compartment. I selected my compartment, and it shows me my database. I'm going to click the database name, which is a link, and it's going to take me to that database where I can then download this file that I just mentioned. So to do that, I'm going to click on the database. I'm going to click on database connection, and then I'm going to download this wallet. And this is the file that's needed to connect to this database that we're going to tell Spatial Studio to connect to. So I'm going to click download wallet. This password is really ends up not being used for anything in what we're doing. So you can type any password you want. I'm typing welcome1. It forces you to type a password. It's not really going to be used for anything in what we're doing today. So you're going to download that, and that's just literally going to be a file that will be saved to your downloads folder. So we can then close that. So now we've downloaded our wallet. We are now ready to do the initial first-time login to our Spatial Studio instance. The reason that we did all this stuff before logging into Studio for the first time is because once we log into Studio successfully and bypass a couple of little warnings I'm going to show you, the very first thing Spatial Studio is going to want is to know, how do I connect to the database that's going to be used for storing all of its metadata. So we wanted to get everything ready to be able to tell Spatial Studio what that database is to connect to. So what everyone's going to do is connect to your Spatial Studio instance using the format here. That IP address that is that IP address, that's your instance address right here. That's the IP address that goes into this format. So it's HTTPS, your IP address, and then :4040 Spatial Studio. So I'm going to do exactly that. So I'm going to go to that page, to that address, :4040 Spatial Studio. Now, depending on the browser you're using, you're going to have some type of security warning. And the reason for that is we're deploying the Spatial Studio application to a web server with public access. And modern browsers all expect there to be a security configuration that sort of attests to the security of this site. And that's a whole process that we're not bothering to go through for this workshop, because we know it's safe. This is our own application. So depending on your browser, you're going to pick the option that lets you sort of go to advanced, accept the risks and continue, or a similar message that your application, that your browser asked for. So once you do that, you'll have the Spatial Studio login. When you have the Spatial Studio login, you're going to log in using the username admin and the password welcome1. So I'm going to do admin and welcome1. So that'll take a moment, and then you're going to have that first you're going to have that question that Spatial Studio, before doing anything else, it needs to have information about the database to connect to store its own information. So you're going to start with this screen. It's asking you, what type of database will we connect to? And we're going to select Oracle Autonomous Database and click Next. So I'm going to select Autonomous Database and click Next. The next thing it's going to do is, step 2, is ask us for that wallet. That's the file that we just downloaded a moment ago when we navigated to our Autonomous Database. So that's going to be in the Downloads folder, And I will go to my downloads folder here. And here's the wallet that we just loaded. And then once you've loaded it, you're going to see it displayed here underneath. And you say, OK. So once you've done that, it's then, as you see on the right, going to ask you for, how do I log into this database? And you're going to log in using the following, which maybe Wayne can put into the chat. The username that you're going to put in is studio_repo. Repo is just short for repository. And the password is welcome1 with capital W's. And then underneath that, there's a choice of different service levels, and medium is fine for what we're doing. So it looks like this. It's studio repo, and then welcome1. I'm going to pick medium and say OK. Now this might take 20 seconds or even 30 seconds. And the reason for that is what Spatial Studio is doing is making a first-time connection to a database, and then it's creating a bunch of tables and a bunch of stuff that it needs to operate. And then from here on out, whenever we connect to this Spatial Studio instance, it already knows about this database connection that stores all of its information. So this is information like, what are the connections to other databases that exist? What are all the data sets that have been created? What are the projects and analyses that exist? So it's now doing that work. It's creating doing some work in the background to create the metadata, the information it needs to operate. And it's now told me that Spatial Studio database content has been created, and we should get that initial page. So here's that initial page in my environment that we looked at before. So that takes us to here. So that means basically Spatial Studio is ready, and we're able to continue now and actually begin the labs of the workshop. So this was all just getting the environment up and going, first time login, connected, so that we can begin. And as a quick time check, I think it looks like I have maybe another 20 minutes or so, which will be enough to at least get started and go through some of the highlights. And again, people can do this again at your own pace, and you know, if you haven't been able to keep up. So in order to start the workshop labs, you're going to go back to your live labs page, and then underneath this environment information is the workshop itself, and that looks like this. So here is the workshop page. Remember, if you have any trouble getting back to this, if you didn't know where that was, if you go back to Live Labs and click on Launch Workshop, that's basically what takes you to this information. And then underneath this information is the workshop itself that we're going to start. And remember that the introduction and getting started, we've already done that. That's the stuff we just did. So we're now ready to actually begin the first lab, which is loading data, and then we'll be able to start the more interesting stuff. So with that, I'm going to just expand all the steps and sort of walk through this together. So we're going to load two files, basically. The first file are a bunch of accident locations, and the second file is a combination of both police station locations and police sort of precinct locations. So in step one, there's a link here to download a file in a GeoJSON format, sort of a spatial JSON format that has these accidents. So I've clicked that link, and I'm going to say Save File. And then once that's done in Spatial Studio, I'm going to go to the Data Sets page and create a data set by loading that GeoJSON file. So I'm going to go to the Data Sets page. I'm going to click Create Data Set. And then I'm going to navigate to Downloads, and looks like I already had one. I'll rename it. Okay. So I will drag and drop accidents.json. And then it's going to give me a preview of the data, and this looks fine, just date and a couple of attributes. I have to tell Spatial Studio where to load this data. We only have one connection, and we're just going to use that sort of built-in initial connection for all the data we're working with. You know, normally you'd have a variety of other databases that you're accessing data from and maybe want to load data to, but you're just going to pick Spatial Studio, and you can leave the default table name and associated data set name alone. No need to validate in this case. So I'm going to submit, and I'm going to say I don't want to see that message again. So it's working away and loading. We could take a look here and see exactly what I just did. So we picked the Spatial Studio connection. I'm going to load that data. And then when it's done, we now see that we have one data set listed on our data sets page. One thing I wanted to mention was that, you know, again, the hamburger menu opens and closes that panel, but when it's open, there's also this little double arrow down at the bottom that will expand it and show you the page names, if that's helpful. So you can sort of expand and collapse with that, and then open and close the whole thing with the hamburger menu. Okay, so now that we've created this data set, you will see that there's a little warning icon next to it on the page. So you can actually click on that warning, and it tells you what the warning's for. And the warning is because there's no key column, which is important for some operations require it, so we'll add it. So it's a unique column that we need to have in the data. Now, it turns out that there is no natural unique column in this data, but fortunately, Spatial Studio allows you to create one. So the instruction here says that we're going to create a key column and call it accident ID. So I'm going to say create column, key column, accident ID. Okay. So it's created that column, and now I can say apply, and then that warning is going to go away. Now that's completely good to go, ready to be used, our accident locations. So that's the first set of data. The second set of data are the police locations, police station locations, and boundaries for coverage areas. So next we're going to add them. So I'm going to go back to create data set, and once again we're going to load. This is a common, well-known format that we can support. So I'm going to say create data set, and I'm going to drag and drop what I just downloaded in, and it's going to unpack the zip file, and there's actually two spatial files basically inside that zip file. One for the police station locations and one for the service areas. So we're going to let that unzip for a moment and sort of see what's going to happen when that unzips. So drag and drop that in, and then once it's unzipped, it's going to show us information about the first of the two sets of data in there, which are police boundaries. And then after we load that, it's going to show us information for the second set of data in there, which are the police locations. So here's the first one, which are these police boundaries. Again, I'm going to pick Spatial Studio as my connection. I don't like this long sort of redundant name. So we're going to change the name of the table and the data set, which again, just a pointer to that table, and just call it police bounds, and then leave all the rest of the defaults. So we'll say submit, and that's starting to load the police boundaries. Now, while that's happening, the next set of data in that zip file were police station locations. So again, the one and only connection that we have, and I'm going to change the name to police points, leave the defaults, and submit. So that now we have these two police layers, and they both have the little warning icon with the same issue, not issue, but the same situation we saw before where there's no key column. However, this time it turns out, we know that it turns out there is a unique column in this data that we can use. So as I show down here, we're going to, for each one, click the little warning icon to go to dataset columns. And then there's a field called component name, which is abbreviated COMPNT_NM. That's a unique field that we can use for our key. So if I click on the little warning, go to dataset columns, pick component name, validate the key. I won't want to look at this again. That's valid. And now that little warning will go away. I'm going to do the same thing for my police points. Select component name. And now all three of these data sets are completely ready to go. So that's our data loading exercise so that we have some data to work with. And the next step, the next lab, is to create a project where we start to work with that data. As you can see, doing this at your own pace, each of these, I mean, I estimated people would spend half an hour just on this to go leisurely at your own pace, and I have like 10 minutes left, so we're obviously not, haven't even done the stuff we need to start doing the analysis yet. However, I think we can get through enough of this quickly to give you a good idea of how this works. So
David,
now that
we've been given a reprieve that we can go another 20. So.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Thank you. Great. Okay, so now we have our data. I described before how a project is the working environment for viewing, visualizing your data, analyzing it, sort of all the interactions that you're going to have. So we're now in lab 2, where we're going to create a project and we're going to add some data to that project, starting with accidents. So step 1 is to go to the projects page, click create project, then the plus sign to add a data set, and we're going to pick accidents as the data to add. So just to catch up with just that piece, I'm going to click on projects. Remember, if you're confused about which page is which, you can expand and collapse that menu to see what the pages are called. I'm going to say create project, and I want to add a data set. So you click on the little plus sign next to data elements and add data set, and I'm going to pick accidents. And then you're going to see that accident shows up in the tree. In order to view it in the map, you simply click to click and hold and drag and drop the data set into the map. So click and hold, drag, drop anywhere in the map, and it's going to sort of navigate to the extent of that data. Now, data sets are all those references to data in tables and views that we've already talked about for Spatial Studio. When you're in a project and you add a data set and you put it into a map, then that's become something that we refer to as a layer. So when we talk about layers, it's really just data that's in a map. So now we have our first layer in a map, which are these accident locations. And it looks sort of like this. Now, I just wanted to, without belaboring it, call your attention to some of the ways that you can add little widgets and things to the map if they're useful to you. Not essential for what we're doing right now, but a map has a settings button, this little gear. And when you click on it, it gives you the ability to do things like change the title, the name of this map. You can turn on and off the legend. You can show navigation controls, which you'll see in a moment. You can show a scale bar. If the data happen to have time, date, and time fields, you could add a little time slider. We're not doing this for this workshop, but I'll just pick these 3 items and say, okay. So you can see that it's created these widgets like, we've got a zoom out, zoom in thing. This lets us tilt and rotate. And we've got a scale bar that you can select the units that you want. And then you can, of course, just turn those things right back off if you don't need them. So just calling your attention to the fact that that's available to you. The next thing we want to do is take a quick look at how you can control the way things look in the map. So each layer in the map has a little hamburger menu. When you click on it, the very first item is settings, which is where you control the behavior, the look and feel of what you have in the map. So for accidents, I'm going to click settings. And there's a bunch of tabs. Style is just controlling the way that this layer looks. And you can control the size and the color of what you of points. If these were polygons or lines, as we'll see later, you can control the fill color and the outline color. So I'm just going to pick, like for right now, change the size to something that's a little smaller. And I'm also going to change the opacity and make these completely like dark. So that's just an example of controlling the way something looks in the map. So that's sort of what I do here. So now we've got all of one layer in the map, and we want to add some more data sets to our project and add them to the map. So we're next going to add that police data, the police boundaries and the police points. So we're going to go back to that little, actually, I think I say 3 here to make it a little smaller. Actually, let me mention now that to get back to the main view of the layers in the map, I remember I went to settings. Up at the top of this middle panel is a little link that says back. So you can always go back and forth between settings and the main view of layers by clicking that back link. So I'm going to click plus to add additional layers, and you can multi-select here. So I'm going to select and then shift select and select both of these police layers, and they appear now in the project. So they're available for us to add to our maps. So now what I'm going to do is to first drop the police points in and give them a different style. And then I'm going to drop the police boundaries in and give them a different style. So coming back to the project, I'm going to click the police points, which are like police stations. And I'm going to go to their settings, and I'm going to give them a color. I'm going to make them blue, and I'll make them 4. And now I've got my police stations as well as accident locations. And then we'll do the same thing. And well, actually, before we do that, when you add a new data set into the map, you can see that what happens is they are put on top. The order that you see things in this layers list is the visual order in the map. If I'd like to have my police station locations underneath the accident locations instead of on top, when I get the crosshair on a layer, I click and hold, drag, and drop. And now, whoop, I released in the wrong spot. Now the police points are underneath the accident. So you click and hold, and you can move the order of things up and down. Now we're going to do the same thing for the police boundaries. So we're going to put the police boundaries in the map, and they're going to initially be on top of everything else, which is not great. So we're going to take the police boundaries. We're going to click once and click, hold, drag, and drop. So initially, they're sort of transparent boundaries on top of everything. That's obviously we want the points on top of these areas. So I'm going to click and hold, drag, and drop. So now my police boundaries are at the bottom. Another important control that you have in the map is to be able to turn on and off the visibility of these different layers. And that's with this little blue eyeball. It says toggle visibility in the tooltip. So if you click that little blue eyeball, it turns layers on and off, so you can control what you see. Okay, so now like we styled the accidents and the police points. Those are both points. We can style the polygons. So I suggest in the workshop one way to do that looks decent is to go to settings, and then I think what we do is we can just see, what do I say here? Reduce the opacity, meaning less opaque, more transparent, so we can sort of see through these shapes is one thing. And then the next thing we can do is, instead of these dark outlines, which really kind of give it a cluttered sort of look, we can change the outline to like white or something very light and more opaque. And then if we make the boundaries themselves a little darker, sort of make the boundaries a little darker. I mean, make the fill a little darker, make the boundary lighter, and maybe even a little thicker. You can see that, you can easily see these areas and their boundaries, and it's a little less cluttered. This is completely subjective, and it's, you can really play around with the look and feel of this until it's something that you like. But here is sort of an initial display. We haven't done anything with interactivity or anything yet with data, but just to see these different layers, sort of control the way they look. You can see them in the legend. Now, one other feature of Spatial Studio is the ability to have multiple views of your data. So you can have maps and tables and multiple maps and tables. So what I'll do next is to add a table and another map. To get to other views of your data, on the left here of this data elements panel, underneath the container, which is data, is a little icon with these little different symbols where you can get add more tables and maps to your canvas. So I'm going to drag and drop table here, and then I'll drag and drop map here. And then to get back to my data so that I can drag it into these views, I'm going to click back on this container symbol. And now I can just click on accidents once and then drag and drop it, say in here, and maybe I'll drag and drop accidents over here. And you can start to see how we have, can sort of have multiple views of our data showing maybe different things in the maps and in the tables. Now, we're not really going to use multiple views for anything we're doing in this workshop, but it's worth you just seeing that that's possible. One other item I will mention here is that that you can collapse these panels. So if I want more real estate for these views, there's a little triangle here that appears when you hover. When you click on it, it'll collapse that panel. And then the triangle goes the other way, you can reopen it. Okay, so we'll next we don't need those views anymore. So those extra views. So clicking the X will close them. And what we can do now is just save our work, the work we've done so far, so that we won't lose it and we can come back to it. So we're going to save this project and call it Live Lab Spatial Intro. So to save a project, there's a save button here, Save Project. And I'm just suggesting the name Live Labs
David, a gentle
Spatial.
notice of 9 minutes.
Okay. Live Lab Spatial Intro. I don't really need a description. And I'll save. So now our work's saved. If I go back to the projects page, I now can see that that project exists. I can always come back to it. And we would now move on to a whole bunch of ways to style your data. Now we only have 9 minutes left, so I don't have time to go through all these and then actually show you any analyses at all, and that would be a shame. So I think what I'll do is just, instead of going through all these, I'll give you just a quick peek at what some of these look like, and then I think we'll just jump ahead. And remember, you can always come back, do this whole thing again at your leisure. So if we open up our project again, we want to look at, say, accidents, and we want to view it in different ways. Right now, we're looking at the accidents as these individual circles. We could look at them as clustered points, like we see here, where each point represents like a whole cluster of accidents at a given location. And then as you zoom in, you'll start to see those clusters explode into different areas where, there's, as you zoom in, obviously fewer individual accidents in each cluster. That's one way to view the data. You can also view the data as a heat map that just sort of shows you the concentration of accidents at different locations. And you can control things like the radius of influence over these colors, Just basically a way to show the density or concentration of information. And there's also a whole library of symbols you can use if you wanted to show accidents as like a little car or an airplane or something silly. I'm just going to go back to these points. So that's just some of the ways you control the way things look. Another thing that you can do is control the way things look in the map based on data. So say I wanted to control the way the points look based on the number of vehicles involved in the accident. So here is, just a basic example where I'm going to make the symbols darker the more accident or the more vehicles were involved in a given accident. So if I change this a little bit, and even if I turn off the police points, now you can see that we have these, and even the bounds, you can start to see that we've got these symbols that become darker when there were more accidents involved. So there's a whole bunch of additional stuff I have in here that lets you do things like enable tool tips and pop-up windows that show you information about crashes, about any of the data in your map. That's all accessible from within settings, so you can turn on tool tips and info windows, pop-up windows, and all that kind of stuff. But what I think I'm going to do with the last few minutes that we have is try to jump ahead into a couple of analyses. And since I don't really have time to go through all the styling, it's not going to look exactly like it would if I had gone through all that styling, but I'm just going to jump ahead to a couple of spatial analyses. There's an introductory section that you'll be able to go back and look through that talk about the different categories of analyses, but I'm just gonna give you a quick example of some of these. And this is going to be, okay, so back in our map here, say I have a question, say the question I want to ask, I'm going to turn off the bounds. I'm going to change my police points. No, I'm not going to change my police points. I'm going to change my accidents, and I will make them not based on data, make them a single color, and I will make them all some like greenish color like this. So here are all my accidents. So I may have a question like, which accidents are within a certain distance of a given police station? That's the kind of question that we might want to ask. So I'm going to pick a police station so that I can do that analysis, and I'm going to click on it in the map so that this police station right by my cursor in here has been selected. And I'm going to ask the question, and it's a question about accidents. I want to filter all the accidents down to just the ones that are within a distance of the police station that I selected. So in the menu for the layer I'm asking about accidents. I want to filter them down to just the ones near that police station. I'm going to go to accidents. I'm going to pick spatial analysis. That opens the dialog for all the spatial analyses that we have in Spatial Studio, which are basically those spatial features I described in the database, kind of with a GUI. And they're organized into categories like spatial filtering that we're going to do, merging or aggregating or joining things together spatially, measuring things, doing some analytic sort of spatial aggregation type operations. We'll just do a basic spatial filter, and we want to return items or shapes that are within a specified distance of something. That's exactly what we want to do. We want to find the accidents near that police station. So I'm going to click that item, and then the result is going to be an analysis, which is just a new data set. And I can give it any name, and I'll say accidents near police station. So the layer that I want to filter are my accidents, and the layer I want to use as the filter are my police points, the police stations, but not all of them, just the one I selected. And that's what this option is here that was automatically turned on. It says I want to filter my accidents based on the selected police station. And how do I want to filter it? Let me just take the ones that are within 150 kilometers of the police station I selected. So that's basically going to structure behind the scenes for me an analysis, and then I can come back in, drag and drop, and you see the result visually in the map. Now that just is another, I dragged and dropped it in. It's just another data set. It has the same dialogue. I can sort of change the way it looks, and I can move it up and down in the layer list. Maybe I want to put it underneath here so it sort of looks like I'm highlighting in red the items that are within that proximity. Now, we just created that analysis. That analysis now is saved as a data set. It has a GeoJSON endpoint. The underlying SQL is accessible. The things that if you're just a casual user, you don't really care about that, that's fine. If you're sort of a more technical person, you can see exactly how this was done and how it works. Now, that was an example of a proximity-based analysis. How about an example of a containment type analysis? So say here, I'm going to pick a region like this region here. I want to know which accidents happened within that region. So again, I'm going to filter accidents, go to spatial analysis. I want to filter, but here return items or shapes that are inside of another. And that's what I want in this case. Inside police region. So I want to filter accidents based on the police boundaries, only the one that I selected. So let me run that. That's now added. I can drag and drop, and now we see exact same thing. Just found the ones that are inside that region. Now that is, I'd say, like the absolute kind of hello world, turn the lights on with Spatial Studio, the most basic sorts of things. As you can see in these menus, there's a ton of other stuff that we can do. There's a bunch of additional stuff that's in the workshop that does a bunch of additional things that now that it's 2 o'clock, I'm not going to have time to step through with everyone, but it's in the workshop. And one more time, I'd encourage you to, when our time is done now, you still have a few hours or a couple hours in your reservation, go back and go through the steps in the workshop, or you can spin this whole thing up again at your convenience. And you'll see a bunch of these other sorts of operations that do like all kinds of other things to answer spatial questions. And that's what the rest of these labs are here, that do additional things that we sort of didn't have time to do right now. And the last thing that I'll mention here is that, when we're done, so you get rid of this. When we're done, I might want to save this. So I'm going to save this now. So my Live Lab spatial intro is now updated, and say I wanted to share this project with others, publish it. So intro, and I'll just call it published. Say share. All right. So now if I go back to my home page, I don't need these changes. If I go back to my projects page here, I can now see that project has been published, and I actually could open it up as a published project. This is sort of the shareable web page that you could share with others, and you could strip down. You could sort of strip this down as something that you can embed into another application, but you'll see here as something shareable. It doesn't have any of the features that let you add new data from the back end and do reach back to the database sorts of stuff. It's just a interactive visualization with whatever data you had added when you shared the project. So that is your kind of very fast overview to about 40% of what's in here, and the result are these other interesting analyses and a whole bunch of other interactivity sorts of exercises in the labs that I hope folks will want to look at. And as I go forward in here, I want to go back before I turn it back to Wayne, that again, we have information about how to get Spatial Studio, but also a bunch of resources that just talk about introductory information, some like this webinars, recorded webinars on installing Spatial Studio from the cloud marketplace, blogs, a bunch of resources, and then also, of course, just getting in touch with us if you need to ask any follow-up questions, and I'll be glad to talk to you more offline from this event. So I'm going to now turn it over to Albert, I guess, if Albert's still on, or Jean with poll questions.
And we'd like to also announce that Eric Probst was our winner of the $25 merch certificate. So we will be sending you an email with the details to that.
So Carrie, if you could start the poll questions, that would be great. And so folks could just give us a little bit of feedback about the balance of the content for today's session. This is definitely the first time that we're holding live hands-on labs in a virtual setting using this platform. So we appreciate everybody's willingness to try it. Okay, great. So some folks like the balance, and a significant number of folks did want more time for hands-on practice. So that's great feedback for us to take into account. Carrie, if we could go to the next one. And yeah, just
that's going to be a no. That's going to be a no. I just answered no for me, so I don't know about anyone else.
It is a lot of information, as David said, and as Wayne has posted, the actual lab is available on the Live Labs website for you to take a look at your leisure. And the A&D OUC Slack workspace is a great place for the community to connect, and you guys can actually connect with all of us after the event there as well. So when you go back to the lab to play around with it, do feel free to type in any questions or comments or feedback on the lab at the A&D OUC Slack workspace in the spatial channel for David's workshop, or for the Graph Studio lab for those of you who are working on it this morning with Giant and Albert. Great, thanks, Carrie. And I think there was a final poll question. And yeah, based on what you know about Spatial Studio, are you looking at it for any potential projects, or are you just exploring? Okay, great. There's a mix with some folks looking at it for current projects and many folks who are just exploring, which is awesome. So I think that's it for the poll. So thanks a ton for that.
David, can we advance to the next slides and we can wrap up today?
You should see the TechCast now, TechCast slides.
Regarding the integration of OAC, Oracle Analytics Cloud, and Oracle Spatial Studio. David and I will be presenting on that topic in one of our partner user groups. It's the ODTUG, Oracle Developer Tool User Group Kscope conference. It'll be virtual this June. We will be presenting on Oracle Analytics Cloud and Spatial Studio together, and how we can work between the two tools. And so with that, we have wrapped day 2 of a 3-day TechCast days. We would ask you if to join us tomorrow with the Analytics Plus starting at 11 Eastern Daylight Time. Please forward, next slide. And just a reminder, we like to do these TechCast days quarterly or around quarterly. And so please save the date. We will be doing another round of 3-day TechCasts in October 5, 6, and 7. More information on the andouc.org website. And if you are interested in being a presenter for that, we are looking for presenters. If you have a unique solution, please get in touch with us. We would love to have other people presenting to the community. Again, please join us on Slack, our newsletter, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. All that information is there on the screen and has been posted in our chat channel from this session. And we will be following up with emails of all of this information as well. And again, we have more TechCasts coming along in the future. We try to do a couple a month. And if you'd like to be a TechCast presenter, doesn't need to be a TechCast Days presenter. It could be just a regular TechCast presenter. We typically like to see these at the 30-minute to 50-minute time frame. So present your solution, your concept. Please submit your abstract at the URL provided. And one more slide. And our next TechCast, which is coming up on June 3rd, is by Patrick Wheeler. It's introducing autonomous database tools. So please, if you have an opportunity, sign up, join up, and join us on that on Thursday, June 3rd. And I think that may be it. Oh, of course. Don't forget the merch, exit through the gift shop. We would like to let you all know that we do have some merchandise available for the A&D OUC. Please check out our shop. There's some great little knick-knacky things and some fun, a cup that changes color and shows. And so please, if you are looking for some unique gifts, take a look at that. And thank you very much for attending our Spatial and Graph Hands-on Lab TechCast Days. This has been a great time. I appreciate our primary presenters from Oracle, Albert, Giant, and David. Thank you very much. And then all of the people behind the scenes that have been helping put this together, Jean, Carol, Siva, and Hans, and Lee, and Jose, or Jesus. And we, again, thank you very much, and we wish you all well.